Once I was giving an interview for a very reputed Indian startup. I won't take the name, but that startup was a very famous online food ordering startup. The interviewer over there asked me that what is an anonymous function? I just quickly said that a function without a name is an anonymous function. That was easy, right? Then she moved on to the next question, which was, what are first class functions in JavaScript? Okay, so now I got nervous because I never knew what first class functions are. I have heard of callback functions, I have heard of higher order functions, I have heard of arrow functions, pure functions, but I haven't heard of first class functions. What are they? And I got nervous. The interviewer, she was looking directly into my eyes and I was gone. I said that I don't know. Okay, I don't know the answer to this question. So then she moved on to the next question, which was, what is the difference between a function statement and a function expression? And now that nervousness from here went till here. Okay, I didn't know. I didn't know what a function expression is, statement is. So many things were going upon in my head. I thought that statement, expression, both were looking like the same. So when the nervousness went to the next level, I firmly said that a statement which has function in it is a function statement. And oh my God, the reaction of that interviewer was like, she is just going to kill me there and there itself. She made such a weird face. I mean, like if I close my eyes, I can still like recall that face. Okay. And I knew that I am like gone in the interview, like finished. So this video is dedicated to that interview and that interviewer. So let's see what all these things are, and let's dive deep into the code now. Okay. So let's move. So we will be covering all these topics. Let's go upon these slowly one by one. Okay. So first of all, let us see what a function statement is. Okay. So you know how we create a function. There is one way to create a function like this. So if we write a function keyword and we give a name, so this is a function statement. Okay. So suppose our function does nothing but just a console log. Okay. Let's just console log and let's give it a called. That's it, right? So this way of creating a function is known as a function statement. That's it. That's all. Okay. And remember, I have told you several times throughout these videos that functions are very beautiful in JavaScript, and functions are like the heart of JavaScript, right? So a beautiful feature of function is that you can assign it to a variable also. Okay. So suppose if I have a var b, we can assign a function to it. Okay. We can assign a function to it. Function acts like a value. Okay. You might have heard this before. I am revising it. Function acts like a value. Okay. So it's like a value which you are initializing. You are initializing this b with a value, like putting function this into b. So this is how beautiful functions are in JavaScript. In many programming languages, you can't do this, and people coming from like other languages might find this crazy, but this you can do. Okay. Let's just log something inside this also. So let me do a console log of b called. Okay. So this is known as a function expression and this is known as a function statement. Both are ways to create function. And I was using this since many years in our programming, but I never knew what the difference between these jargons are like. And in the interview, I was using this, right, a lot in my code, but I never knew in the interview that this is what it is, right? So the interviewer did not ask me what it is. The interviewer asked me the difference between function statement and a function expression. So what is the difference between these two? So the major difference between these two is hoisting. Okay. So let's first see how do you call this function. Okay. So you call this function by just calling it like this. You know? And even in the case of function expression, you call it like this, right? If I call it, if I run this program, so see, it prints A called and it prints B called, right? So that is how we call it. But the difference between creating functions with these two types is hoisting. So how does hoisting come into picture? So what if I call this function A even before creating it? Okay, so here I am creating the function, but I want to call it before creating it. And similarly for B also. So you have seen my hosting video, right? So what do you think the output will be? If I call these functions before even creating them in code, what will happen? Can you give it a guess? Yes, let's just see. So one will throw out an error. Which one? The B. So that is the difference between a function statement and a function expression. So during the hosting phase, during the memory creation phase, A is created a memory and this function is assigned to A. But in case of a function expression, this B is treated like any other variable. It is assigned undefined initially until the code hits this line itself. So when the JavaScript engine executes this line by line and it reaches this line, then only this function is assigned to this variable B. Until then it is undefined. Okay, so here the value is undefined and you can't call that B, right? That is the major difference between function statement and a function expression. So now let's move on to function declaration. So function declaration is nothing. This is another jargon, and function statement is also known as function declaration. Okay, so they both are the same thing. If you say function declaration or a function statement, these are both the same things. So now let's move on to the anonymous functions. So anonymous functions, as you know, a function without a name is an anonymous function. This is an anonymous function. Okay, but let me tell you a little more about anonymous functions. So anonymous functions does not have their own identity. Okay, when I say it does not have its own identity, that means if you create an anonymous function like this will result out to be a syntax error. Okay, so why a syntax error? Let me tell you. An anonymous function looks like a function statement, right? It looks like similar to that, right? See, if you clearly see, this looks exactly same as a function statement, but it has no name. But according to ECMAScript specification, a function statement should always have a name. So this is an invalid syntax. Let me run and show it to you. So if I save this, run this, so this is C, a syntax error, and clearly see the message which it says. A function statements require a function name. Okay, so see, it's a function statements. Okay, these function statements, it is type of a function statement and it requires a name. Okay, you need to give a name over here. You can't leave it anonymous and create anonymous functions like this. So now when you can't create it like this, what is the use of it? So anonymous functions are used in a place where functions are used as values. So I have said this a lot of times. Let me repeat it once again. Functions are like very beautiful in JavaScript. I love functions, and functions I think are heart of JavaScript. They are so powerful. You can use them as values also, right? And anonymous functions are used when the functions are used as values. Okay, when they are used as values. So when I say they are used as values, that means that you can use it to assign it to some variable. So just like you assign any other value to a variable, okay, you can assign this anonymous function also to a variable. So it acts like a value. Here you can use anonymous functions, but in function statements, you cannot use an anonymous function. Okay, so that is why it says function statements require a function name. Okay, you know, this knowledge of knowing what is a function statement, a expression, a declaration, and all these things is very important also. It helps you a lot if you are debugging programs. So if you read clearly the message, right? So function statement. So here it's not an expression, it's a statement. So these things, these keywords will kind of click your mind and you will better understand JavaScript. And generally you might have seen that when we are reading blog articles or we are reading books, sometimes it is very confusing, right? The author uses the term expression somewhere, it uses statement somewhere. So this is what it means. Okay, so this knowledge will be very helpful when you are reading some books of JavaScript, some blogs of JavaScript, some Stack Overflow answers. This all knowledge will be very helpful for that. So now let's just see what is a named function expression. Okay, so let me just first of all remove these errors. Okay, let me just comment it out and let me bring these calls over here once again. So now let me tell you what is a named function expression. So a named function expression is like exactly the same as this function expression, but when this anonymous function, instead of using an anonymous function here, we use a function with a name. Suppose if I gave it a name, so this becomes a named function expression. It's kind of weird, right? You are like kind of giving a name to the function here also, and you are giving the name to the function here also. It's like weird, right? But this is possible in JavaScript. Like you can have the name of a function itself and then put it into an expression. So this is known as a named function expression. Remember, a named function expression. Now here there is a corner case also. There is a gotcha. Okay. So we can call this B function like this. But what do you think? What will happen if I do something like this? XYZ. So can you guess what will happen if you just call this function XYZ like this? Give a guess. So you will get an error. Okay. So it is a very famous output question also. So you might get a MCQ where the person might have called this XYZ like this, but it will throw out to be an error. Okay. So this will give a reference error that XYZ is not defined. Okay. So why it gives XYZ is not defined? So if we see clearly, this XYZ, if you put a function like this, right? If you use this function as a value, so in this case, this XYZ is not created in the outer scope. Okay, so this XYZ is not a function inside this outer scope, in this global scope, but it is created as a local variable. Okay, when I say a local variable, if you want to access this function inside this function, okay, if you want to access this function inside this function, okay, so suppose if you want to access XYZ, you can access it over here, right? You can access this function, see it prints XYZ, and you can access this function over here. But if you try to use it outside like this, it will throw out to be an error where it is, okay, let's go to console. So it gives you a reference error that XYZ is not defined. Okay, so this is what is called as a name function expression. And if you just don't give a name over here, it is like a normal function expression, or you might call it as an anonymous function to create a function expression. Okay, so something like this. So let me just revert it once again and just remove this XYZ, and let's move on to the next part. Okay, one more thing which I have often seen is that a lot of programmers use parameters and arguments as interchangeably terms, but no, they are very different. Okay, so these two things, parameter and arguments, are very different. Okay, so whenever you are creating a function, so whatever you put over here, right, these identifier or these labels, right, over here are known as parameters. So that is why you can call it as a param1. Okay, so you might have seen the syntax written a lot of places. So this identifier or the label or this variable, okay, this is a local variable in the function scope. Okay, so this param1 and param2 are local variables inside this function. You cannot access this param1 and param2 outside. Okay, so these local variables, or you can call it them as the identifiers or the labels, so whatever you might call them, so these are the parameters of a function. And the arguments which you pass over here, like if I give a 1 and a 2, so this is known as arguments. A lot of people, use this as interchangeably and don't know this. That is why often when you read a blog or you read a book, then somebody is using an argument somewhere, somebody using parameter. So you should actually have a mental model of what that person is talking about. That is when you will understand these blogs and articles and books, right? So once again, the values which we pass inside a function are known as arguments, and these label and identifier which gets those values are known as parameters. Okay, so now let's move on to the most critical part, which is first class functions. Okay, so what are first class functions? So this is a very heavy term for what we already know. So as I already told you, and let me repeat it once again because it is very important, functions are very beautiful in JavaScript. Functions are very strong. Functions are heart of JavaScript. And just because it is like that, we call them as a first class functions. So the functions are so beautiful that instead of these arguments, we can even pass functions inside another functions as an arguments. Okay, listen to this carefully, arguments. So functions are treated as values, right? I told like you can use an anonymous function to pass in as a value also. Okay, that is how beautiful functions are. And you can receive that in the parameters. Okay, so if I pass this anonymous function inside param1 and I try to access this param1, see what we get. Okay, this is a perfectly valid JavaScript. Okay, see, we got this anonymous function inside it, right? And there is one more way to pass this function okay, inside this function. Okay, suppose it was a named function, let's call it as xyz. Okay, and if I pass this xyz like this, we can do that too. Okay, so it's like passing another function inside a function, right? We are passing this xyz inside b. That's how beautiful functions are, and we can do that. And not just this, if we pass this function into this function, we can also return a function from a function. Okay, crazy it sounds, right? So we can return a function from a function. We can return an anonymous function from a function. And what will happen is, when you invoke this b, right, when you call this b, this function will be returned over here, right? So let's just try to do a console log of this. Okay, so if I do a console log of this, so let me just remove this xyz, and let me just remove this xyz also. And if I now run this code, so see, when we call this function, so this function, anonymous function, were returned from b, and we did a console log, so it prints an anonymous function. And if it was a named function, we can return that too. Okay, so what is first class functions? So first class functions is nothing but this only. The ability to use functions as values is known as first class functions. So let me repeat it once again. The ability of functions to be used as values and can be passed as an argument to another functions and can be returned from the functions, this ability is known as first class functions in JavaScript. Nothing more than that. Okay, these ability of these functions to use an value and assign it to a variable and can be passed into another functions and can be returned out of another functions, this ability all together is known as first class functions. That is what is first class functions, and it's not just in JavaScript, it is a programming concept. It's in other languages also. Not in every language, but in many languages also. So an interview question can be, what are first class functions in JavaScript? So you have to explain it like this, okay? When they are treated as a value, passed into another functions or returned from another functions. So this is known as a first class functions, okay? This ability is known as the first class functions. That's all it is, right? So if you read blog articles or if you read books, okay, so a lot of times you might also find a statement which is functions are first class citizens. Let me repeat it once again. Functions are first class citizens. Okay, so let me write it down. First class citizens. Okay, so when I say first class citizens, it means the same thing. First class functions are used as first class citizens. So it's both the same thing. Okay, so if you read it in some blog or if you read it in some book, assume that this ability to be used like values makes the function as first class citizens in JavaScript. I know this is kind of like playing with English and words, right? But that's how it is. And it is important to know all these things, because if we read it in some book, we should understand what that author is trying to say, right? JavaScript has a very vast community, right? A lot of people are writing Stack Overflow answers, blogs, articles, this, that, and they use all sort of notations. So what I try to do is I am just giving you this knowledge so that next time you read these blog articles, you will properly understand what that author is trying to say. If somebody says that functions are first class citizens, that means he is referring to first class functions. That means the ability of these functions to be used as values, passed inside another function, get out from the function, like returned out from the functions, use them to assign into a variable. All these things make, say, functions as the first class citizens in JavaScript. Remember, will you remember this lifetime? Remember this lifetime, okay? So one more doubt you might get is that what if I use a let or const over here? So suppose if I use a let or const over here. So in that case also it behaves the same way just like let and const normal variables do. They are in a temporal dead zone until it encounters this statement. Okay, so it is treated exactly the same. If you want to get more information, it is in the let and const video, right? Go watch that again if you are still confused about it. So in the let and const video, whatever rules are applied, the same rules are applied to these also. So these are nothing. This const b is nothing but just like a constant, another variable. And this function over here is acting just like any other value which is being assigned to this b. Okay, so that's how and that's what it is. Okay, so now this function statement and a function expression or a function declaration, these all things can also be written using arrow functions. Okay, arrow functions has come up as a part of ES6. You can call it as ECMAScript 2015, and this let, const, arrow functions, these things were introduced in ES6. Okay, so these function statements, function expression, this all things can be created using arrow functions also. Okay, but let's not do this in this video because I haven't told you what an arrow function is up till now in this series. I have seen a lot of people asking in comments that what will happen in case of arrow functions, arrow functions, arrow functions. Don't worry people, I am covering the basics first of all. Okay, the basics of JavaScript, because when JavaScript was built, it was not built with arrow functions, right? It used to have var, it used to have function keyword. So let us first explore these basic nitty-gritty things about these beauty of JavaScript which was originally made, right? And we will slowly transition towards this ES6 new things also. You know, I am not avoiding let, const, or arrow functions or something, because those things are being used a lot, right? I will make a separate video altogether just for covering arrow functions. That will be a very interesting video. I will be covering everything, like how this keyword works and how arrow function syntax works, how higher order function works, and how statements, declaration, expression, everything we will be covering in arrow function series. Just keep calm and wait, no issues. Everything will be covered slowly. And trust me, I'm not going anywhere. I'll teach you everything. Just keep on watching this series and watch it in the sequence, okay? In the next video, we will be covering callbacks and higher order functions. Those are very important topics in JavaScript if you want to learn functional programming, okay? So don't miss that video. That is a very crucial video. But before moving on to that video, give this video a thumbs up. It gives me a huge motivation, and see you in the next video. Till then, thank you for watching Namaste JavaScript.